The venue was breathtaking, crystal chandeliers reflecting off the polished marble floors, white roses cascading from ornate centerpieces, and the soft melody of a string quartet filling the air. Everyone said my brother Blake's wedding would be the event of the year in our small Connecticut town. What they didn't know was that it would also be the day my entire identity would crumble beneath the weight of a microphone in my mother's manicured hands. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I always knew our family had secrets. What family doesn't? But I never imagined I'd discover the truth about my existence during a champagne toast with 200 guests as witnesses. The moment my mother's voice echoed through those speakers, announcing that I had only been conceived as a backup plan for my perfect older brother, time seemed to stop. And in that frozen moment, 27 years of memories suddenly required re-examination. My name is Olivia Mercer. For as long as I can remember, I've lived in the considerable shadow of my older brother, Blake. Growing up in Willow Creek, Connecticut, our lives looked picture-perfect from the outside. A sprawling colonial house with a wraparound porch, successful parents, and 2 children who always smiled for the Christmas cards. My father, Richard, built his law firm from the ground up, and my mother, Eleanor, was the quintessential society wife who volunteered at every charity event within a 50-mile radius. Blake was 4 years older than me and excelled at everything. Captain of the debate team, valedictorian, Yale graduate, and now a cardiothoracic surgeon engaged to Harper Williams, the daughter of my father's golf buddy and business partner. Our parents never tried to hide their admiration for Blake. It was evident in every conversation, every family dinner, every milestone celebration. Did you hear about Blake's promotion? My mother would announce it to the checkout clerk at our local grocery store. Blake just purchased a lake house, my father would boast at his firm's holiday party. I learned to accept my position in the family hierarchy early on. I wasn't resentful, at least I didn't think I was. Blake had always been kind to me, unlike the stereotypical big brother who torments his younger sister. He helped me with my homework, defended me against middle school bullies, and always saved me a dance at his formal events. But despite our good relationship, there was an unspoken understanding in our family. Blake was the star, and I was, well, just Olivia. My achievements were acknowledged, but never celebrated with the same enthusiasm. When I graduated with honors from Boston University with a degree in environmental science, my parents hosted a small dinner. When Blake finished medical school, they rented out the country club and invited half the town. I told myself it made sense. Becoming a doctor was a bigger accomplishment than my bachelor's degree. But deep down, a quiet voice wondered if there was more to it. I built a life for myself regardless. After college, I moved to Burlington, Vermont, where I worked for a nonprofit dedicated to cleaning up Lake Champlain. I had a small circle of close friends, a cozy apartment overlooking the water, and a golden retriever named Edison. My visits home became less frequent. Holidays, the occasional birthday celebration, and now, my brother's wedding. When Blake proposed to Harper last Thanksgiving, our mother immediately transformed into a wedding planning machine. Every weekend, for 6 months, I received calls about flower arrangements, seating charts, and whether the bridesmaids should wear sage green or dusty blue. I was Harper's maid of honor, a role I accepted with genuine happiness for my brother despite feeling somewhat out of place among Harper's socialite friends. "We need everyone to arrive at the venue by 2 p.m. sharp for photos," my mother stressed during our final planning call the week before the wedding. "And please wear your hair up, Olivia. Those loose waves you favor don't photograph well with the neckline of your dress." I bit my tongue and agreed. This weekend wasn't about me, and I'd long ago learned to choose my battles with Eleanor Mercer. The rehearsal dinner on Friday night was held at the Willow Creek Inn, a historic hotel downtown that had been renovated into a luxury boutique establishment. I arrived early to help with last-minute details and found my mother directing the staff with military precision. The place cards need to be angled precisely 45 degrees. Not whatever this is, she was saying to a young server who looked close to tears. Mom, everything looks beautiful, I said, setting down my overnight bag. Maybe we can give the staff a little breathing room? She turned, noticing me for the first time. Olivia, finally. I need you to check on the welcome bags in the bridal. Sweet. Harper is concerned they don't have enough local artisanal chocolates. No hello, no how was your drive, just straight to the tasks at hand. I nodded and headed upstairs, passing my father in the lobby, deep in conversation with Harper's father about some recent legislative change that would benefit their investments. The weekend proceeded as expected. Blake was charming, Harper was glowing, and my parents were in their element, hosting the social event of the season. I performed my duties as maid of honor flawlessly, held Harper's bouquet during the vows, fixed her train for photos, gave a heartfelt toast about growing up with Blake and how lucky Harper was to have found such a caring partner. The ceremony on Saturday was traditional and elegant. The reception that followed was extravagant. A 5-course dinner, a 10-piece band, and an open bar featuring craft cocktails named after significant locations in Blake and Harper's relationship. I was seated at the head table between Harper's cousin Amber, who spent most of dinner texting under the tablecloth, and my great-aunt Meredith, who was hard of hearing and kept asking me to repeat myself. As the night progressed, I found myself gravitating toward the bar more frequently than I normally would. Something about being home, surrounded by the constant reminders of Blake's perfection, made me feel small again. After my third glass of champagne, I stepped outside onto the veranda for some fresh air. Needed an escape too, huh? A voice said from the shadows. I turned to find a man around my age in a perfectly tailored suit, leaning against the stone balustrade. He had dark hair cut short on the sides, kind eyes, and a crooked smile that suggested he was all too familiar with family obligations. Just taking a breather, I replied. Large gatherings can be a bit overwhelming. Tell me about it. I'm Cameron Walsh, by the way, friend of Blake's from medical school. Olivia Mercer, sister of the groom. His eyebrows raised slightly. The famous sister. Blake talks about you all the time. I couldn't hide my surprise. He does? Constantly. Your environmental work, your passion for marine conservation, your ability to recite entire episodes of The Office from memory. I laughed, feeling something tight in my chest loosen slightly. That last one isn't exactly a marketable skill. I disagree. I find that very impressive. His smile was warm, genuine. We talked for nearly 30 minutes, the sounds of the reception floating through the open doors behind us. Cameron was a pediatric oncologist at the same hospital as Blake, had grown up in Seattle before moving east for medical school, and shared my love for hiking and obscure documentary films. For the first time that weekend, I felt seen for who I was, not just as Blake's sister or Eleanor and Richard's daughter. We should probably head back inside, I reluctantly suggested, as the band announced they would be playing the final slow dance before the cake cutting. Cameron nodded. Would you like to dance? The question was simple, but something about the way he asked, as if my answer genuinely mattered to him, made warmth spread through my chest. We rejoined the reception just as the band began playing a slow cover of Can't Help Falling in Love. Cameron's hand rested lightly on my waist as we swayed to the music, and for a moment, I allowed myself to forget the constant comparisons, the subtle slights, the feeling of being the family's afterthought. The spell was broken by the wedding. Planner's voice over the microphone, announcing it was time for the cake cutting and final toasts. Cameron and I separated, him heading back to his table with a promise to find me later, me returning to the head table where my mother was frantically gesturing for me to join them. Where have you been? She whispered harshly as I slid into my seat. We're about to do the family toast. Sorry, just getting some air, I replied, straightening my dress. My father stood first, giving a practice speech about the value of partnership and how proud he was of Blake for finding someone who matched his ambition and character. Harper's parents followed with emotional words about welcoming Blake into their family. Then, surprisingly, my mother took the microphone. Eleanor Mercer was not one for public displays of emotion. Her affection came in the form of perfectly coordinated dinner parties and meticulously planned holiday celebrations. So when she stepped up to the microphone, champagne flute in hand, and tears already forming in her eyes, the room fell into a hushed silence. "When Blake was born," she began, her voice wavering slightly, "Richard and I knew immediately that we had been blessed with an extraordinary child. From his first steps to his first words, everything Blake did was remarkable. Standard mother of the groom. Fair, I thought, taking a sip of water and glancing across the room where Cameron was watching attentively. "We had such dreams for him," my mother continued. "We sacrificed everything to ensure he had every opportunity to succeed. And look at him now, a brilliant surgeon, married to a wonderful woman from an excellent family." She dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. But the path wasn't always easy. When Blake was 3, he was diagnosed with a rare blood disorder. The doctors told us. Her voice cracked, and my father stood, placing a supportive hand on her back. "A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off." This was news to me. I straightened in my chair, confusion creasing. My brow. Blake had never mentioned any childhood illness. My mother composed herself and continued. "The doctors told us that he might need a bone marrow transplant someday. They advised us that siblings often make the best donors." She looked directly at me then, her gaze somehow both tender and clinical. "That's when we decided to have another child." The room was silent. Not the comfortable silence of rapt attention, but the heavy silence of collective discomfort. I felt a cold sensation spreading from my chest to my fingertips. "Olivia was our insurance policy," my mother said, smiling through her tears as if she was sharing a heartwarming anecdote. "We conceived her specifically to be a perfect match for Blake, should he ever need a transplant." The ringing in my ears nearly drowned out her next words. Thankfully, Blake's condition went into remission before such measures were necessary. But we were blessed with our daughter regardless. Blessed regardless. Insurance policy. Backup plan. The words swirled in my mind as nausea rose in my throat. Mother raised her glass. "To Blake and Harper, may your children bring you as much pride and purpose as ours have brought us." The guests, unsure how to respond to this revelation, raised their glasses hesitantly. I sat frozen, feeling 200 pairs of eyes flicker between my mother and me. Blake was staring at our mother with an expression I'd never seen before, something between shock and fury. Harper was squeezing his hand so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "And to you, Olivia," my mother added, seemingly oblivious to the bomb she had just detonated. "Thank you for always being there for your brother, just as we planned." Just as they planned. I felt like I was floating outside my body, watching the scene unfold from somewhere near the crystal chandelier. 27 years of existence reduced to a medical contingency plan. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I vaguely remember my father attempting damage control, pulling my mother away from the microphone. Blake approached me with concern, etched across his features. Me assuring him I was fine, that he should enjoy his wedding night. The pitying glances from guests as I made my way to the exit. "Olivia, wait!" It was Cameron, catching up to me in the hotel lobby. "Are you okay? That was intense." I attempted a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Just family drama." "Nothing. Ruins a wedding like the truth, right?" He didn't laugh at my poor attempt at humor. Instead, he offered to drive me back to my hotel. I declined, needing solitude to process what had just happened. "Can I at least give you my number?" he asked. genuine concern in his eyes. Under different circumstances, I would have been thrilled by this development. Now I could barely focus on the digits he was entering into my phone. Back in my hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my bridesmaid dress, and tried to make sense of my mother's revelation. Had everyone known except me? Blake's shocked expression suggested otherwise. But what about my father? My grandparents? Had I been discussed in hushed tones as the backup throughout my childhood? Memories replayed in my mind with new context. The annual medical checks that were more thorough than seemed necessary. My mother's peculiar interest in my blood type and genetic health. Her disappointment when I chose environmental science over medicine despite my aptitude for the latter. The foundation of my identity had been built on quicksand, and now I was sinking. My phone buzzed with messages. Blake, my father, even Harper. But I couldn't bring myself to read them. Instead, I booked a flight back to Burlington for the earliest possible time the next morning. I needed distance, perspective, and the comfort of my own space. As dawn broke over Willow Creek, I checked out of the hotel without saying goodbye to anyone. The wedding brunch scheduled for that morning would have to proceed without the sister of the groom. On the drive to the airport, my phone rang continuously. I finally answered when Blake's name appeared for the 4th time. "Liv, please don't. Leave like this." His voice was strained, somewhere between exhaustion and desperation. "We need to talk about what happened." "I can't right now, Blake. I need some time." I had no idea. "You have to believe me. What Mom said? I never knew that. Was why they had you." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Well, that makes 2 of us." "It doesn't change anything," he insisted. "You're my sister. I love you for who you are, not why you're here." But it did change everything. Every childhood memory, every family dynamic, every insecurity I'd ever felt about my place in the Mercer family had just been validated in the most public way possible. "I'll call you when I'm ready," I said quietly, before hanging up. As the plane took off, I watched Willow Creek shrink beneath me until it was nothing more than a cluster of tiny buildings and winding roads. Somewhere down there was the perfect family portrait we'd cultivated all these years. And now I had to figure out who Olivia Mercer really was, not as Blake's sister or Richard and Eleanor's daughter or even as a medical insurance policy, but as herself. The revelation at the wedding was just the beginning. What I didn't know then was that unraveling the truth would lead me down a path I never expected, uncovering secrets that would reshape not just my understanding of my family, but of myself. The familiar view of Lake Champlain welcomed me as my taxi pulled up to my apartment building. Edison was waiting at my neighbor Tara's place, and I texted her that I was home earlier than expected. The gentle rhythm of Vermont life, so different from the manicured perfection of Willow Creek, usually brought me comfort. Today, however, it felt like I was returning to a life built on false premises. "There's my favorite neighbor," Tara called from her doorway as I trudged up the stairs. Edison bounded toward me, his golden fur catching the late morning sunlight. "You're back early. Was the wedding that bad?" If only she knew. "Just needed to get back," I replied vaguely, burying my face in Edison's soft fur to hide my expression. Tara, a perceptive kindergarten teacher with a penchant for homemade kombucha and brutal honesty, raised an eyebrow but didn't press. "Well, there's leftover spinach lasagna in your fridge. I figured you'd need something after airplane food." I thanked her and retreated to my apartment, Edison trotting faithfully at my heels. The space felt both comforting and foreign. My books stacked on reclaimed wood shelves, the collection of sea glass displayed in a vintage jar, photographs of friends and landscapes pinned to a corkboard. No family photos, I realized. I'd never put any up. My phone buzzed again, a text from Blake. "Please call when you can. I'm worried about you." I silenced the device and collapsed onto my couch, Edison immediately leaping up to rest his head on my lap. The weight of him, solid and warm, anchored me as my mind continued to spin with questions. Monday morning arrived with cruel brightness. I'd emailed my boss, Diane, explaining I needed a personal day, and she'd responded with understanding. By Tuesday, however, I knew I couldn't hide in my apartment forever. The nonprofit depended on our small team, and we were in the middle of planning a major fundraising campaign for new water quality monitoring equipment. "You look like hell," remarked Marcus, our communications director, when I walked into our converted warehouse office space. "Thanks. That's exactly what I needed to hear," I responded, dropping my bag onto my desk with more force than necessary. Marcus winced. "Sorry. Rough weekend?" I offered the simplest explanation possible. "Family stuff." He nodded sagely, as if those two words encompassed the complete upheaval of my identity. "Say no more. Diane wants to see you when you get settled, by the way." Diane Patterson had founded Lake Champlain Revival 20 years ago after watching pollutants destroy the ecosystem she'd grown up swimming in. At 58, she had the energy of someone half her age and the wisdom that came from fighting environmental bureaucracy for decades. Her office door was always open, literally, and I found her typing furiously at her computer, reading glasses perched precariously on the end of her nose. "Olivia," she said warmly, looking up. "Come in. How was the wedding?" The question sent a fresh wave of nausea through me, but I managed a neutral expression. "It was eventful." Diane studied me with the same careful attention she gave to water sample analysis. "You know, when I was 30, I discovered my birth certificate wasn't real. My parents had been running from something before I was born and created new identities for the whole family. I spent months questioning everything I knew about myself." I stared at her, momentarily forgetting my own crisis. "I never knew that." She smiled, the lines around her eyes crinkling. "It's not something I advertise, but I recognize that look on your face, the one that says the story you've been told about yourself no longer fits." Something about her matter-of-fact tone broke through the fog I'd been living in since Saturday night. Before I could stop myself, words poured out. My mother's announcement, the stunned silence of the reception hall, my hasty departure. When I finished, Diane didn't offer platitudes or express outrage on my behalf. Instead, she asked, "What are you going to do now?" The question caught me off guard. In the whirlwind of emotion, I hadn't thought beyond escaping Willow Creek. "I don't know. Work, I guess. Try to forget about it?" Diane chuckled, but there was no mockery in it. "You're a scientist, Olivia. When confronted with new data, what do? Analyze it. Look for patterns, form hypotheses, and test them," I answered automatically. "Exactly. Your understanding of your origins has changed, but that doesn't mean you can't approach this scientifically. What questions need answering? What sources can provide reliable information?" Her pragmatic approach gave me something to grasp onto amidst the emotional chaos. By the time I left her office, I had the beginnings of a plan, not just to survive this revelation, but to investigate it thoroughly. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook, methodically listing everything I knew about my birth and childhood. The facts were sparse. Born at Willow Creek Memorial Hospital on March 12th, seemingly healthy despite being slightly premature at 37 weeks. No major childhood illnesses. Regular checkups that always included blood work. My mother's insistence on storing my baby teeth, which I'd always attributed to sentimentality but now suspected had more clinical motivations. I opened my laptop and began searching for information about the blood disorder my mother had mentioned. The possibilities were overwhelming: lymphoma, leukemia, aplastic anemia, sickle cell disease. Without knowing exactly what Blake had been diagnosed with, I was shooting in the dark. My phone rang, displaying my father's number. After 4 days of avoiding my family's calls, I decided it was time for some answers. "Olivia, thank God." My father's voice sounded ragged with relief when I answered. "We've been so worried." I needed space, I said simply. I understand. What? Your mother said at the reception? It wasn't how we wanted you to find out. The admission that they had intended to tell me someday, just not during a wedding toast, sparked a flare of anger. When exactly was the right time, Dad? My college graduation, my 30th birthday, my own wedding? His sigh was heavy with regret. There's never a good time to have that conversation, and as the years passed, it seemed less relevant. Blake's condition was resolved completely by the time he was 7. What exactly was his condition? I demanded. A rare form of aplastic anemia. His bone marrow wasn't producing enough blood cells. The doctors were optimistic about his prognosis, but they warned us that these conditions can sometimes worsen suddenly. They suggested having another child as insurance. A backup plan, I supplied bitterly. We never thought of you that way, Olivia, he insisted. Yes, the initial decision came from a place of fear for Blake, but from the moment you were born, you were our daughter, loved completely for yourself. I wanted to believe him. Part of me did, but another part recalled 1,000 little moments when I'd felt secondary in our family's narrative. If you loved me completely for myself, why was everything always about Blake? My voice cracked despite my efforts to remain composed. Why were his accomplishments celebrated while mine were just acknowledged? The silence that followed told me my father had no ready answer. Finally, he spoke. I never realized you felt that way. I'm sorry if we made you feel less important. It wasn't intentional. Was it better or worse that they hadn't consciously favored Blake? That the disparity in how they treated us was so natural they didn't even notice it? I need time, Dad, I said finally. And I need answers, real ones, not sanitized versions, designed to protect anyone's feelings. After extracting a promise from him to email Blake's medical records, I ended the call feeling emotionally drained, but somehow more centered than I had been since the wedding. The next morning, I awoke to find my father had followed through. Attached to his email was a scanned copy of Blake's pediatric records from Willow Creek Memorial. I printed them out and spread them across my kitchen table, Edison watching curiously from his bed in the corner. The medical terminology was dense, but my science background helped me decipher the basics. Blake had indeed been diagnosed with aplastic anemia at age 3 after showing symptoms of fatigue and unusual bruising. His condition had been moderate, not immediately life-threatening, but concerning enough for the specialists to discuss long-term treatment options. Bone marrow transplant was listed as a potential intervention if his condition worsened, with a note that family planning for potential sibling donor underway. That clinical phrase, family planning for potential sibling donor, described my conception. I was the result of that planning, my existence justified in a medical chart before I was even conceived. The records showed Blake's condition had indeed improved by the time he was 7, with his blood counts returning to normal ranges, without requiring the transplant I had been created to provide. Regular monitoring had continued until he was 18, at which point he was officially declared cured. I sat back, absorbing this information. My birth had been a medical intervention that ultimately proved unnecessary. How should that make me feel? Relieved that my bone marrow was never harvested? Disappointed that I never fulfilled my intended purpose? Or angry that my entire existence had been predicated on someone else's needs? The last page of the file contained a genetic compatibility report dated shortly after my birth. Sibling shows 6-6 HLA match, ideal donor candidate. I had been exactly what they'd hoped for, perfectly designed to save Blake if necessary. My phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. Hi, Olivia, it's Cameron Walsh from the wedding. Just checking if you're okay. No pressure to respond. I'd completely forgotten about the dark-haired doctor I'd danced with before my world imploded. The fact that he'd thought to reach out days later suggested either remarkable kindness or that The aftermath of my mother's announcement had been even more dramatic than I remembered. "I'm surviving," I texted back. "Thanks for checking." His response came quickly. "Surviving is a good start. Blake's been worried. He doesn't talk about it. At work, but I can tell." An unexpected wave of guilt washed over me. In my rush to process my own feelings, I hadn't considered how Blake might be handling the revelation. Had he truly been oblivious to the circumstances of my birth? If so, he was experiencing his own version of an identity crisis, discovering that his relationship with his sister had been built around a medical contingency rather than the simple joy of family expansion. "Is he okay?" I found myself asking Cameron. "Physically fine. Emotionally complicated. Not my story to tell, but I think he'd really appreciate hearing from you when you're ready." I set my phone down without responding. Was I ready to talk? To Blake? What would I even say? "Congratulations on your wedding. Sorry I left early after finding out I was conceived as your spare parts." Instead of ruminating further, I decided to channel my energy into learning more about the science behind what had happened. The public library downtown had medical research journals I could access, and the university library was open to community members for on-site reading. By Friday, I had compiled a small research library on aplastic anemia, bone marrow transplantation, and the ethics of conceiving children for medical purposes. I discovered the practice had a name, Save Your Siblings, and a considerable body of academic literature debating the ethics involved. Some papers argued that as long as the child was loved for themselves, the motivation for conception was irrelevant. Others questioned whether parents could truly separate their view of the child from their intended medical purpose. One article particularly struck me: a longitudinal study following 30 Save Your siblings into adulthood. The researchers found that how the information was shared with the children had more impact on their psychological well-being than the fact itself. Those who learned about their origins in a planned, age-appropriate way generally developed healthy self-concepts. Those who discovered the information accidentally or during family conflicts often struggled with identity issues and relationships with their parents. I definitely fell into the latter category. As I was packing up my notes at the library, my phone rang. Blake's number. After a week of avoiding him, I decided it was time. "Hey," I answered, moving to a quiet corner of the library's lobby. "Liv." His voice held relief and uncertainty. "Thank you for picking up. How are you?" "Processing," I replied honestly. "It's been an educational week." "I can imagine." There was an awkward pause before he continued. "Harper and I postponed our honeymoon. It didn't feel right to leave with things so unsettled." Guilt surged again. "Blake, you didn't have to do that. This isn't your fault." "Maybe not directly, but it involves me. I've been doing my own research, trying to understand what happened." He sounded tired. "Did you know Mom and Dad never told me why they decided to have you? I always just assumed they wanted another child." "Dad sent me your medical records," I said. "I've been reading about aplastic anemia." "Yeah, I barely remember being sick. Just vague memories of hospital visits and Mom being more overprotective than usual." He paused. "Liv, I need you to know something. Whatever the reason they had you, you've never been just a backup plan to me. You're my sister, my only sister, and I love you." The simple declaration brought tears to my eyes. In our family's complicated dynamic, Blake and I had always had a straightforward relationship. He had never made me feel less than, never compared me unfavorably to himself. "I love you too," I managed. "I just need to figure out how to reconcile who I thought I was with this new information. I understand, but you don't have to do it alone." He hesitated. "Would it be okay if I came to visit you in Burlington? Just me, not Mom and Dad. We could talk in person, or not talk about it at all if you prefer. Just be siblings." The offer touched me deeply. Blake's life was meticulously scheduled: surgeries, consultations, research. For him to suggest taking time away to visit me spoke volumes. "What about Harper?" I asked, remembering his newlywed status. "She understands. Actually, she suggested it. She's pretty furious with Mom right now, on both our behalves." That surprised a laugh out of me. "I'm starting to really like my new sister-in-law." "She's pretty great," he agreed, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "So, is that a yes to the visit?" I considered it briefly, then decided, "Yes, I think that would be good." We arranged for him to come the following weekend, and after hanging up, I felt lighter than I had all week. The revelation at the wedding hadn't changed who Blake was to me, just the circumstances that had brought me into existence. That evening, I texted Cameron back, "Thank you for encouraging me to talk to Blake. We're going to be okay." His response made me smile for the first time in days. Doctors aren't supposed to have favorite patients, but I might make an exception for the Mercer siblings. As I sat on my balcony watching the sunset paint Lake Champlain in shades of orange and pink, Edison curled at my feet. I reflected on Diane's advice. The data about my origins had changed, but that didn't invalidate my entire life. Science taught us that new information should refine our understanding, not demolish it. I was still Olivia Mercer, environmental scientist, dog lover, sister. The story of why I existed had changed, but who I was remained within my control to define. And perhaps there was something profound in knowing that my very cells had been perfectly matched to save Blake, even if that capability was never needed. My parents had tried to engineer a medical solution and had instead created a person, with her own dreams, flaws, and potential. Their intentions at conception mattered less than the life I chose to build moving forward. The question remaining was whether I could forge a new relationship with my parents based on complete honesty, rather than comfortable half-truths. That reconciliation, if possible, would take time and painful conversations. But for now, I had made peace with my brother, and that was enough progress for 1 week. What I didn't know then was that Blake's visit would uncover another layer to our family's story, one that would challenge everything I had just come to, except about my origin and purpose in ways I couldn't possibly anticipate. The week before Blake's visit flew by in a flurry of activity. At work, we were finalizing grant proposals for new monitoring equipment, which kept me distracted during office hours. In the evenings, I alternated between cleaning my modest apartment and continuing my research into savior siblings. I wasn't sure what I was looking for exactly. Perhaps validation that my complicated feelings were normal, or maybe guidance on how to move forward. I also found myself texting with Cameron more frequently. What had started as check-ins about my well-being evolved into conversations about our shared love of hiking, recommendations for documentaries, and amusing stories from his pediatric oncology ward. His messages became bright spots in otherwise emotionally draining days. "Just had a 5-year-old patient explain to me very seriously that chemo makes her hair fall out so she can grow unicorn hair next," he texted on Thursday evening. "She's certain it's already starting to come in rainbow colors, but only she can see it." I smiled at my phone, curled up on my couch with Edison's head resting heavily on my lap. "Did you confirm her diagnosis of the impending unicorn transformation?" "Absolutely. Wrote it in her chart and everything. Medical school doesn't prepare you for the really important diagnoses." There was something refreshing about Cameron's approach to life, finding joy and humor even in challenging circumstances. It was a quality I found myself needing more than ever. Friday morning brought an unexpected email from my mother. The subject line read simply, "For you," and the body contained only 2 sentences. I found these while organizing the storage room. "I thought you should have them." Attached were scans of what appeared to be pages from a journal, dated from the year before I was born. The handwriting was unmistakably my mother's, precise cursive with distinctive loops on her capital letters. April 15th. Dr. Mitchell suggested we consider having another child as a potential bone marrow donor for Blake if his condition worsens. Richard is hesitant, concerned about the ethical implications. I told him we would love this child regardless of the circumstances of conception. We already wanted more children. This just gives us additional motivation to move forward now rather than waiting. May 30. We've decided to try. I've stopped my birth control and started tracking my cycle. It feels strange to be approaching pregnancy with such clinical precision, but the possibility of helping Blake overrides any discomfort. Richard keeps asking if we're doing the right thing. I don't have a perfect answer, only the certainty that I would do anything to protect our son. September 12th. Positive pregnancy test today. My emotions are complicated, joy mingled with fear. What if this child isn't a match? What if Blake's condition deteriorates before the baby is born? Dr. Mitchell assures us there are other treatment options to explore in the meantime, but I can't help worrying. December 8th. The amniocentesis confirmed the baby is a girl. The preliminary genetic screening suggests she will likely be a suitable donor match for Blake. Richard cried when we got the news. He admitted he's become attached to this baby for her own sake, not just what she might do for Blake. I understand. I find myself talking to her, telling her about the world she'll enter, promising her a life full of love. I stared at the screen, emotions swirling. These journal entries showed a more complex picture than the cold medical calculation I had imagined. My mother had been frightened for Blake, yes, but there was also genuine affection for the unborn child I had been. More entries followed, chronicling my mother's pregnancy, her hopes, fears, and growing attachment to me. The final entry was dated 2 days after my birth. March 14th, Olivia Grace Mercer came into our world yesterday, all 6 pounds 3 ounces of her, perfect in every way. The moment the nurse placed her in my arms, any lingering thought of her as Blake's donor vanished. She is our daughter, a miracle in her own right. The genetic testing confirmed she's a perfect match for Blake if needed. But looking at her tiny fingers and the determined set of her jaw when she cries, I already know she will be so much more than that. Blake is smitten with his baby sister, constantly asking to hold her. Perhaps someday we'll explain to Olivia the unique circumstances that brought her to us. But for now, we're simply celebrating her arrival for the joy she is. Tears blurred my vision as I reached the end of the entries. The narrative was more nuanced than the stark backup plan announcement at the wedding had suggested. There had been medical calculation, yes, but also the normal excitement and love of expecting parents. I wasn't sure how to respond to my mother's email, so I simply wrote, "Thank you for sharing these. I'm still processing everything. But these help." Her reply came quickly. "There's more when you're ready. I understand if that time isn't now." The simple acknowledgement of my need for space, without defensiveness or demands for forgiveness, felt like a small first step toward whatever our relationship might become. Saturday morning dawned bright and crisp, a perfect Vermont autumn day. Blake's flight was scheduled to arrive at Burlington International at 11:30 a.m. I woke early, taking Edison for a long walk along the lakefront trail to burn off my nervous energy. As I watched him splash joyfully in the shallows, I contemplated what I wanted from Blake's visit. Not apologies. He had nothing to apologize for. Not explanations. He had been as much in the dark as I was. Perhaps what I needed most was simply the reassurance that our sibling bond transcended the circumstances of my birth. The small airport was quiet when I arrived to pick up Blake. His flight landed on time, and I spotted him immediately among the deplaning passengers, tall and confident in jeans and a navy quarter-zip sweater, so different from the formal attire of the wedding yet instantly recognizable. Liv. He wrapped me in a bear hug, his familiar scent of sandalwood cologne temporarily transporting me back to simpler times. Thanks for letting me visit. Thanks for coming, I replied, stepping back to study him. There were new lines around his eyes that hadn't been there at the wedding. You look tired, he shrugged. It's been an intense couple of weeks. Between postponing the honeymoon, dealing with Mom and Dad, and covering extra shifts for a colleague on emergency leave, sleep hasn't been a priority. I led him to my car, a practical but aging Subaru that had reliably transported me to remote, water sampling sites for years. I thought we could grab lunch at this lakefront cafe I like, then head back to my place. Edison is eager to meet his uncle. Sounds perfect, Blake agreed, settling into the passenger seat. I've been looking forward to meeting the famous Edison. Your Instagram is basically a shrine to him. The cafe, Shoreline Provisions, was a local favorite with outdoor seating overlooking Lake Champlain. We secured a table on the deck, ordered sandwiches, and fell into an easy conversation about Burlington, his work, and my latest water quality project. We tacitly avoided the elephant in the room, both seemingly content to re-establish our connection before diving into heavier topics. It wasn't until we were walking along the shoreline after lunch, watching sailboats glide across the lake's surface, that Blake broached the subject. I've been angry at Mom and Dad, he admitted, skipping a flat stone across the water. Not just for how they told you, which was inexcusable, but for never telling me. I've been carrying this guilt, thinking about all the times I was celebrated while you were not. I watched his stone make 4 impressive hops before sinking. Did you know that environmental activist Julia Butterfly Hill lived in a 180-foot-tall redwood tree for 738 days to prevent it from being cut down? Blake blinked at the apparent non-sequitur. No, I didn't. When I was 16, I did a research paper on her, got an A+. Mom put it in the fridge for 3 days. I picked up my own stone, testing its weight. The same week you got accepted to Yale Medical School. They threw a party and invited everyone they knew. Liv, I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad, I interrupted, tossing my stone. It sank immediately. I never mastered the wrist? Flick, I observed. The point is, I always knew I was second tier in their eyes. Finding out why doesn't actually change much about how I experienced our childhood. Blake was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. Did you resent me for it? The question was direct, vulnerable. I considered it, honestly. No, I finally answered. That's what's been most confusing about processing all this. I never resented you because you were always genuinely supportive. You came to my science fairs and swim meets. You helped me with college applications. You treated me like I mattered. Because you do matter, Liv. His voice was fierce. You always have. I know that now, I assured him. Mom sent me some journal entries from before I was born. Have you seen them? He shook his head. She offered, but it felt like an invasion of your privacy somehow. They're actually somewhat reassuring. The conception might have been calculated, but the love seemed real enough. I paused, then added, She mentioned there are more when I'm ready. We continued walking, the conversation flowing more easily now that we'd acknowledged the situation, directly. By the time we returned to my apartment, where Edison greeted Blake with exuberant affection, the tension had largely dissipated. That evening, we ordered pizza and opened a bottle of wine, settling into the comfortable domesticity of adult siblings spending time together. Blake entertained me with stories of his more unusual patients, and I showed him photos from my recent field research trip to monitor tributaries feeding into the lake. Harper wants to meet Edison, Blake mentioned, scrolling through the pictures, on my phone. She's always wanted a dog, but her schedule is too unpredictable right now. Bring her next time, I suggested, surprising myself with how naturally the invitation emerged. Edison loves visitors, especially ones who sneak him treats when they think I'm not looking. Blake grinned sheepishly, putting down the crust he'd been about to slip to the attentive golden retriever. Busted. We drifted into comfortable silence, Blake absently scratching Edison's ears while I refilled our wine glasses. "I found something else in my research this week," Blake said suddenly, his expression turning serious. "Something that doesn't make sense." "What do you mean?" He pulled out his phone and opened his email. "I requested all my old medical records, not just the summaries Dad sent you. Most of it confirmed what we already knew. The aplastic anemia, diagnosis at 3, improvement by 7, complete resolution by 18. I nodded, following along. But then I found this. He handed me his phone, displaying a scanned document. "It's a record of the genetic testing they did to determine if you were a match for me." I took the phone, scanning the technical document. "Right, the HLA matching. Dad sent this to me too. Look at the date." I checked the top of the form. February 10th, 3 years after my birth. "That's odd," I said slowly. "Why would they wait 3 years to check if I was a match? The whole point was to have a backup immediately available if you needed it." "Exactly." Blake's expression was unreadable. "And there's more. Look at this notation at the bottom." In small print, easily overlooked, was a note. "Secondary confirmation of HLA matching requested by parents' pre-adoption proceedings." I stared at the words, trying to make sense of them. "Adoption proceedings? That has to be a mistake." "That's what I thought at first," Blake said. But I kept digging. I found another document, a letter from our family lawyer to Mom and Dad, dated around the same time. He scrolled to another email attachment and handed the phone back to me. The letter was brief but clear. "Dear Richard and Eleanor, I've reviewed the documentation you provided regarding the formal adoption of Olivia. As discussed, while the biological relationship has been established through DNA testing, the legal situation remains complicated due to the original circumstances of the surrogacy arrangement. I recommend proceeding with a formal adoption to solidify your parental rights and ensure there are no future complications. The genetic compatibility testing you've had should satisfy the court's interest in the child's welfare, demonstrating both biological connection and medical benefit. I've prepared the necessary paperwork for your review, attached to this correspondence. Yours sincerely, Thomas Westfield, Escorti." The room seemed to tilt around me. "Surrogacy arrangement? What is he talking about?" Blake's face was troubled. "I don't know, Liv. I've been trying to make sense of it myself. If you were conceived as a savior sibling, why would there be any question about Mom and Dad's parental rights? Why would adoption be necessary?" My mind raced, trying to fit this new information into the narrative I'd constructed. Could it be some legal technicality related to the medical purpose of the conception? "Maybe," Blake said, but he didn't sound convinced. "But the term surrogacy arrangement suggests something else entirely." I set down my wine glass, my hand suddenly unsteady. "So what are you saying? That I wasn't conceived by Mom and Dad as a savior sibling? That I was... what? Born to someone else?" "I don't know," Blake admitted. "The records raise more questions than they answer. I wanted to talk to you before confronting Mom and Dad again. The implications were staggering. If I wasn't conceived by Eleanor Mercer as a savior sibling, then the story revealed at the wedding, the story I'd spent 2 weeks processing and coming to terms with, was false. Or at least, incomplete in significant ways." "We need more information," I said finally. The scientist is brain kicking in despite my emotional turmoil. "Did you find anything else?" Blake shook his head. "Just these documents. The adoption references could potentially be explained by legal precautions related to medical conception, but the surrogacy mention is harder to explain away." I rose and began pacing the small living room, Edison's concerned eyes following my movement. "Mom said she had more to share when I was ready. Maybe this is part of it. Are you ready to ask her?" Blake's question was gentle, acknowledging the complexity of my still raw relationship with our parents. I considered this. The journal entries had revealed a more humanizing side of my mother than the cold announcement at the wedding had suggested. but they'd also been carefully selected excerpts, potentially curated to paint a specific picture. Not directly, I decided. Not yet, but there might be another way to get information. What are you thinking? Grandma Sullivan, I said, referring to our mother's mother who lived in a retirement community in Massachusetts. She never mastered the art of discretion, especially after her second glass of sherry. If there's family history to uncover, she'd know it, and probably be willing to share it. Blake's expression brightened. That's actually brilliant. She always did have a soft spot for you. For both of us, I corrected. Remember how she used to mail us candy that Mom had explicitly forbidden? And then swear us to secrecy with that conspiratorial wink of hers. Blake smiled at the memory. Do you think we could visit her? It's only, a 3-hour drive from here? 2.5, I confirmed. We could go tomorrow if you're up for it. I just need to arrange for Tara to watch Edison. The plan energized us both, giving purpose to our shared confusion. We spent the rest of the evening reminiscing about our grandmother, her quirky habits, her blunt commentary on family matters, her genuine affection for both her grandchildren. The comfortable sibling dynamic we'd always shared reasserted itself, stronger now for having weathered a challenge together. As I made up the pull-out couch for Blake later that night, he paused. In the doorway of the bathroom, toothbrush in hand. Whatever we find out tomorrow, Liv, it doesn't change who we are to each other. You know that, right? The simple statement brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I know, I managed to say. You'll always be the annoying big brother who taught me to ride a bike and then laughed when I crashed into Mrs. Winter's prized hydrangeas. He grinned. And you'll always be the stubborn little sister who got right back on that bike and then deliberately rode through her flower bed the next day to prove a point. The memory, shared and treasured, anchored us in our connection regardless of biological complexities. Whatever revelations awaited at Grandma Sullivan's retirement community, we would face them together. What I couldn't have anticipated was that our grandmother's revelations would not only explain the mysterious adoption documents, but would connect to a decades-old family secret that would redefine everything we thought we knew about the Mercer family, and would ultimately lead us back to Willow Creek for a confrontation that none of us were prepared for. Pinewood Gardens retirement community sat on 15 manicured acres in western Massachusetts, its brick buildings and flowering landscapes designed to convey dignified comfort. As Blake and I pulled into the visitor parking lot Sunday morning, I felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. We had called ahead, and Grandma Sullivan had sounded delighted at the prospect of an unexpected visit from her grandchildren. Should we have brought something? I asked, suddenly concerned we were arriving empty-handed. Blake reached into the back seat and produced a small gift bag. Got this while you were getting coffee this morning. Her favorite chocolates and that lavender hand cream she's always talking about. I smiled gratefully. Ever the thoughtful one. Not thoughtful enough to tell her why we're really coming, he pointed out. You ready for this? The truth was, I wasn't sure. Grandma Sullivan, Margaret to everyone else, had always been refreshingly direct, sometimes brutally so. If there were family secrets to uncover, she would either reveal them without hesitation or shut us down completely. There would be no middle ground. The retirement community's main building had a lobby that resembled an upscale hotel, complete with a pianist playing soft classical music near a stone fireplace. The receptionist directed us to the garden apartments, where our grandmother had a 2-bedroom unit overlooking the rose garden. My darlings! Grandma exclaimed as she opened her door. At 78, Margaret Sullivan remained a striking woman. Tall and elegant with silver hair styled in a fashionable bob, wearing tailored slacks and a cashmere sweater. She embraced each of us warmly. What a wonderful surprise. Though, I suspect it's not just my sparkling company you've driven all this way for. Blake and I exchanged glances. Her perception had always been unsettlingly sharp. Can't we just want to see our favorite grandmother? I asked innocently, handing her the gift bag. Your only grandmother, dear, which makes the competition rather thin, she corrected with a wink. And of course you can. But the two of you arriving together unannounced, less than a month after that disaster of a wedding toast, something's brewing. She gestured toward her living room. Come in and tell me everything while I pour us some tea. Her apartment was cozy and elegant, filled with antiques she'd carefully selected from the larger family home after Grandpa Sullivan passed away 5 years earlier. Photos of family occupied prime positions on bookshelves and side tables, including several of Blake and me as children. Have you spoken with your mother? She asked as she set out a tray with tea and biscuits. Briefly, I admitted. She sent me some old journal entries from before I was born. Grandma raised an elegantly arched eyebrow. Did she indeed? And what did these carefully curated entries reveal? Her emphasis on carefully curated confirmed my suspicion that there was more to the story than my mother's journal had suggested. That I was conceived as a potential bone marrow donor for Blake, I said directly. But she developed genuine maternal feelings during the pregnancy. Grandma took a measured sip of her tea. A convenient framing. Blake leaned forward. Grandma, we found something else. Legal documents mentioning adoption proceedings and a surrogacy arrangement. We're trying to understand what that means. I watched her face carefully. There was no surprise in her expression, only a slight tightening around her mouth that suggested deliberation about how much to reveal. I've told Eleanor for years that secrets have a way of surfacing at the most inconvenient moments, she finally said. A wedding toast of all things. The woman has always had dreadful timing. So there is more to the story, I pressed gently. Grandma set down her teacup with a decisive clink. Much more. And you deserve to know all of it, not just the sanitized version your mother has constructed. She rose and walked to a secretary desk in the corner, unlocking a small drawer and removing a manila envelope. I've kept these for 27 years, thinking someday they might be needed. She handed the envelope to me. Inside were photographs. A young woman with chestnut hair and a familiar smile, standing in front of a modest farmhouse. In another, the same woman was visibly pregnant, looking down at her rounded belly with an expression of mingled joy and sadness. Who is she? I asked, though something in me already suspected the answer. Sophia Delaney, Grandma replied softly. Your biological mother. The world seemed to tilt slightly. Blake moved closer, studying the photographs over my shoulder. I don't understand, he said. If Mom didn't give birth to Olivia, then the whole savior-sibling story was partially true, but not in the way it was presented. Grandma finished for him. Your parents did want another child who could potentially be a bone marrow donor for you. But Eleanor had complications after your birth, Blake. A severe postpartum hemorrhage led to an emergency hysterectomy. She couldn't carry another child. I stared at the photograph in my hands, tracing the woman's features. There was something undeniably familiar about her smile, the shape of her eyes. So they used a surrogate? Not exactly. Grandma sighed. This is where the story becomes complicated. Sophia was Richard's assistant at the law firm when you were diagnosed, Blake. Young, intelligent, dedicated to her work, and desperately in need of money to help her widowed mother who was battling cancer. The implication hung in the air for a moment before Blake voiced it. Are you saying Dad had an affair? No, Grandma said firmly, though that rumor circulated briefly. The arrangement was clinical, negotiated through lawyers. Richard would be the biological father, providing genetic material that would have a chance of being compatible with Blake. Sophia would be the biological mother and surrogate, carrying the child to term in exchange for substantial financial support for her mother's medical care. I felt strangely detached, as if we were discussing characters in a novel rather than my own origins. And Eleanor agreed to this? Reluctantly at first, But her desperation to secure a potential donor for Blake and her own grief at not being able to have more children eventually convinced her. The arrangement was to remain confidential. Sophia would give birth, sign away parental rights, and disappear from your lives. Eleanor and Richard would adopt you legally while maintaining the fiction that Eleanor had carried and given birth to you. That's why there were adoption documents, Blake murmured. And why did they check the HLA matching 3 years after Olivia's birth? They needed to confirm compatibility before finalizing everything legally. A new thought struck me. Did Sophia know about the medical motivation? That I was being conceived as a potential donor? Grandma's expression softened. Yes, she knew everything, but from what I observed, that wasn't why she agreed. Her mother was dying, and the financial arrangement offered her a way to provide comfort and dignity in her final months. But she also genuinely wanted to help a child in need, you, Blake, and believed creating a new life that might save another was meaningful. I studied the photograph again, searching for connections to my own face. The shape of the eyes, perhaps. The curve of the smile. Small things that genetics had passed along that I had never recognized because I'd been looking for resemblances to Eleanor instead. What happened to her? I asked quietly. Grandma hesitated. The agreement included a non-contact clause. Once you were born and legally transferred to Richard and Eleanor's custody, Sophia was supposed to have no further involvement. But Blake prompted, sensing there was more. But she struggled with the separation more than anyone anticipated. She sent letters asking for updates and photos. Your parents refused, concerned it would complicate matters legally and emotionally. When you were about 2, Olivia, Sophia's mother passed away despite the medical intervention the arrangement had funded. After that, Grandma paused. Sophia stopped reaching out. She moved away from Willow Creek. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she eventually married and relocated to Oregon. I absorbed this information slowly, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. Curiosity about this woman who had given birth to me, sadness for her loss, anger at the clinical nature of the entire arrangement. Why didn't they ever tell me? I finally asked. They let me believe for 27 years that Eleanor was my biological mother. Pride primarily, Grandma replied. Eleanor couldn't bear the thought of people knowing she hadn't given birth to you. And as time passed, the fiction became more entrenched. The medical necessity that had prompted the arrangement became less pressing as Blake's condition improved. It became easier to maintain the story than to disrupt everyone's understanding of the family. Until Mom's wedding toast, Blake observed grimly. Yes, well, 3 glasses of champagne and decades of unresolved emotions created quite the combustible mixture, Grandma said dryly. I suspect Eleanor intended to acknowledge the medical motivation for your conception, Olivia, without revealing the full truth about Sophia. But even partial honesty, after so many years of deception, came out horribly wrong. I reached for my tea, needing something to ground me as my mind processed this revelation. The cup rattled slightly against the saucer, betraying my unsteady hands. There's something else you should see, Grandma said gently, reaching back into the envelope and withdrawing a small cream-colored card. Sophia left this with me, asking that I give it to you if there ever came a time when you learned the truth. The card was simple, just my name written on the outside in elegant handwriting. Inside was a brief message. Olivia, if you're reading this, you now know the circumstances of your birth. I want you to understand that while our connection may have begun as an arrangement, you became so much more to me during the months I carried you. Every kick, every hiccup, every movement was a reminder that you were a person, not a medical solution. I hope you've had a beautiful life filled with love and opportunity. I hope Blake thrived and that you two developed the special bond only siblings can share. Most of all, I hope you know your worth extends far beyond the purpose that brought you into being. With love always, Sophia. Tears blurred my vision as I read the message a second time. These few sentences conveyed more genuine emotion than Eleanor's announcement at the wedding or even the journal entries she'd selectively shared. "Did you ever met her?" I asked Grandma. "Several times. She was a remarkable young woman, intelligent, compassionate, principled, much like you've grown to be." Grandma reached over to squeeze my hand. "You have her sense of justice and her quiet determination." Blake had been unusually quiet, and I turned to find him staring out the window, his expression troubled. "Blake? What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about how many lives were permanently altered because of my illness," he said softly. "An illness I barely remember having. Mom and Dad's marriage, Sophia's life trajectory, your entire understanding of your identity." He met my eyes. "I feel responsible, even though it wasn't my fault." "It wasn't anyone's fault," Grandma interjected firmly. "Circumstances arose, and adults made decisions in response to them. Some of those decisions were questionable, particularly the choice to maintain the deception for so long, but they were made out of love, however misguided." I found myself nodding. "She's right, Blake. No one is to blame for getting sick. And while I'm still processing how I feel about all of this, I'm here because of those circumstances. I exist because of them." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of revelation settling around us. Finally, Blake spoke again. "Do you want to find her, Sophia?" It was the question hovering at the edges of my consciousness, one I hadn't dared fully formulate yet. Did I want to meet the woman who had given birth to me, whose genetic material I carried, who had written me a letter filled with more maternal warmth than I'd often felt from the woman who raised me? "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me is curious, of course, but another part wonders if it would just complicate things further." I looked at Grandma. "Do you know if she'd want to be found?" "The Sophia I knew would be open to connection if you initiated it," Grandma replied carefully. "But that was 25 years ago. People change, lives evolve. She may have built a new family who knows nothing about you." "Like I knew nothing about her," I murmured. "Different circumstances," Grandma countered. "You were a child being protected, rightly or wrongly, from information your parents thought might disturb you. Any family Sophia has built would be adults, capable of understanding complex situations." She had a point, but the decision still felt overwhelming. "I need time to think about it," I said finally. "This is a lot to process." "Of course it is, dear," Grandma agreed, patting my hand. "There's no rush. Sophia's letter has waited 27 years. It can wait a bit longer while you decide what you want." We stayed for another hour, Grandma filling in more details about the arrangement, the legal precautions taken, and her own misgivings about the secrecy that had surrounded it all. By the time we left, afternoon shadows were lengthening across the garden, and my head was swimming with new information. In the car, Blake and I were quiet for the first 20 minutes of the drive, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, he broke the silence. "I never wanted to know," he confessed, eyes fixed on the highway ahead. "When I found those documents, part of me wanted to destroy them and pretend I'd never seen them. Understanding that I was sick is one thing. Realizing that my illness led to this elaborate deception that's shaped our entire family, that's something else entirely. We can't change the past," I said gently. "We can only decide how to move forward with what we know now." "And how do you want to move forward?" he asked. "With Eleanor and Richard? With potentially finding Sophia?" The question was complex, but my answer came with surprising clarity. "I think I need to talk to Mom and Dad first. Really talk. With everything on the table. No more half-truths or carefully edited versions of events. I need to understand their perspective fully before I can decide about Sophia." Blake nodded. "Do you want me there for that conversation?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "This involves all of us." "Then we'll do it together," he promised. Next weekend? I could fly you back to Connecticut, or Mom and Dad could come to Burlington if that would be more comfortable for you. I considered this. The thought of returning to Willow Creek, with all its associations and memories, was daunting. But there was also something fitting about confronting family truths in the place where they had first taken root. Willow Creek, I decided. This began in that house. It should continue there. As we drove back to Burlington, plans taking shape. Between us, I felt both apprehension and a strange sense of liberation. The backup plan revelation at the wedding had been devastating but incomplete. Now, with a fuller understanding of my origins, I could begin to reconstruct my sense of identity on more solid ground. What I couldn't have anticipated was how our planned family meeting would be derailed by an unexpected visitor, someone whose arrival would force all of us to confront not just the past, but the future of our complicated family bonds. Someone whose presence would transform our carefully planned confrontation into something none of us was prepared for. The work week dragged with excruciating slowness. By Friday morning, as I packed an overnight bag for the trip to Willow Creek, my nerves were stretched thin. Blake had arranged everything, booked our flights, informed our parents we were coming for a family discussion, and even arranged for Tara to watch Edison again. "You're going back to confront them, aren't you?" Tara asked as she accepted Edison's food and medication schedule. My neighbor's intuition was, as always, unnervingly accurate. "Something like that," I admitted, kneeling to give Edison a final scratch behind the ears. "It's complicated." "Family always is," she replied with a knowing smile. "Just remember that whatever you discover, whatever gets said, you get to decide what it means for your life moving forward." Her words stayed with me during the flight to Hartford, where Blake met me at the arrival's gate. He looked more rested than he had in Burlington, though tension lingered around his eyes. "Harper sends her love," he said as we walked to short-term parking. "She wanted to come for moral support, but I thought that it might be better to keep this confined to the immediate family." Good call. I appreciated Harper's sentiment, but this conversation needed to happen without spectators. The drive to Willow Creek passed in alternating stretches of strategizing and nervous silence. We agreed on the baseline facts we needed to address, the questions that required answers, and the boundaries we both needed to establish moving forward. "No more secrets," Blake emphasized as we turned onto the familiar maple-lined street where we'd grown up. "Whatever happens, we deserve complete honesty from them, and from each other." The Mercer family home looked exactly as it always had. A stately colonial with pristine white siding, black shutters, and a wraparound porch adorned with hanging ferns. It projected stability, tradition, respectability, all the values our parents had prioritized. Now I wondered how much of that carefully maintained facade had been designed to conceal the complicated truth of our family's foundation. "They don't know we've spoken to Grandma," I reminded Blake as he parked in the driveway. "We should let them explain on their terms first, see how much they're willing to reveal unprompted." He nodded, cutting the engine. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be." Our mother opened the door before we could ring the bell, her expression a mixture of anxiety and forced cheerfulness. Eleanor Mercer had always been meticulous about her appearance, and today was no exception. Tailored slacks, a cashmere sweater, pearl earrings that had been her mother's. But there were new lines around her eyes, and she'd lost weight since the wedding. "Blake, Olivia," she greeted us, stepping back to allow us entry. "Your father's in the living room. I've made that spinach dip you always liked, Blake." The familiar deflection, focusing on food and comfort rather than addressing emotional elephants in the room, was so predictable it almost made me smile, despite my nerves. The house smelled of lemon furniture polish and cinnamon, unchanged from my childhood. Family photos lined the entryway. Blake's graduation from medical school, my college commencement, our parents' 25th anniversary celebration. The narrative of a perfect family, carefully curated and prominently displayed. Our father rose, From his armchair as we entered the living room, his normally confident posture slightly diminished. Richard Mercer had always been the epitome of professional success, commanding, articulate, and strategic. Today, he seemed smaller somehow, more vulnerable. "Thank you both for coming," he said, his lawyer's voice uncharacteristically subdued. "We know this conversation is long overdue." Awkward greetings gave way to even more awkward small talk as we settled onto couches with drinks that no one seemed inclined to actually consume. Finally, Blake cleared his throat. "We didn't come for spinach dip or weather updates," he said directly. "We came because it's time for complete honesty about everything." Our mother's fingers tightened around her glass of sparkling water. "You're right, of course. The wedding toast was inexcusable. I'd had too much champagne, and seeing you, both together, you so happy with Harper and Olivia looking so beautiful as maid of honor, it brought up all these emotions and memories." "It wasn't just the toast, Mom," I said quietly. "It's the 27 years of deception that preceded it." Her eyes widened slightly. "I sent you the journal entries, Olivia. I was trying to help you understand." "Selected entries," I interrupted. "Carefully chosen to support the narrative you wanted me to believe." Our father leaned forward. "What exactly are you saying?" Blake and I exchanged glances. "We know about Sophia Delaney," he stated flatly. The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Our mother's face drained of color, and our father's jaw tightened visibly. "How did you—" he began. "Grandma Sullivan," I supplied. "She thought it was time we knew the whole truth, not just the fragments you've been willing to share." Our mother set down her glass with a sharp click against the coffee table. "My mother had no right—" "She had every right," Blake cut in, voice firm. "We're not children anymore. We deserve to know the truth about our family, about Olivia's origins." "We were going to tell you," our father insisted. "Eventually, when the time was right." "When, exactly?" I challenged myself. "After 27 years, what magical moment were you waiting for?" He had no answer for that. "We need to understand everything," Blake continued, his doctor's voice taking over, calm, methodical. "From the beginning. No more edited versions or half-truths." Our parents looked at each other, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, our mother sighed. "It started when Blake was diagnosed," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "The doctors were optimistic, but they warned us about potential complications, suggested we consider having another child as a precaution for possible bone marrow donation." "But you couldn't have more children," I prompted when she faltered. She nodded, eyes downcast. "The delivery with Blake was difficult. Emergency hysterectomy. It was devastating. We'd always planned to have at least 3 children. Our father took over. We explored adoption, but the doctors emphasized that biological relation increased the chances of compatibility for bone marrow. That's when we started considering alternatives." "Surrogacy," Blake supplied. "Yes, though at that time it wasn't as established a practice as it is now," our father explained. "There were legal complexities, medical uncertainties. And Sophia," I pressed, needing to hear about her from them. Our mother's expression tightened. "She worked for your father's firm, young, intelligent. Her mother had been diagnosed with aggressive cancer, and the treatment costs were overwhelming her. So, you saw an opportunity," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "We saw a potential solution that could help everyone," our father corrected. "Sophia would receive financial support for her mother's treatment, and we would have a child who could potentially help Blake if needed." "Using Dad as the biological father," Blake stated. Our mother looked away. "The doctors advised it would increase the chances of compatibility." "And you agreed to this?" I asked her directly. She met my eyes then, a flash of the formidable Eleanor Mercer I recognized. "I agreed to do whatever," Was necessary to protect my son. Yes. The blunt admission silenced me momentarily. The arrangement was meant to be straightforward, our father continued. Sophia would carry the pregnancy, deliver the baby, and transfer all parental rights to us. We would legally adopt you, Olivia, and raise you as our daughter. Sophia would have no further contact. Except it wasn't that simple, was it? Blake inferred. Our mother's mouth tightened. No. Sophia became attached. She started asking for updates, photos, wanting to be involved in ways that weren't part of our agreement. She carried me for 9 months, I pointed out. Developed a connection to me. That seems pretty human. Of course it was human, our father acknowledged. And understandable. But it threatened the stability we were trying to establish. We were advised that clean boundaries would be best for everyone, especially you, Olivia. What happened to her? I asked. After I was born? Our parents exchanged another glance. Her mother passed away about 2 years after you were born, our father said. The treatments extended her life but couldn't save it. After that, Sophia moved away from Willow Creek. We heard she eventually remarried and relocated to the West Coast. Oregon, I supplied. According to Grandma. Our mother's lips pressed into a thin line at the reminder of her mother's involvement. And you never thought, in 27 years, that I deserved to know any of this? I asked, the hurt finally breaking through my composed facade. We convinced ourselves we were protecting you, our father replied. As time passed and Blake's condition stabilized, the medical necessity became less relevant. You were our daughter in every way that mattered. We told ourselves the circumstances of your birth weren't important. Not important? Blake's voice rose slightly. You let Olivia believe she was conceived as my backup plan, which was painful enough, without telling her she also has a biological mother out there she's never met. We made mistakes, our mother admitted, her voice cracking. Terrible mistakes. The wedding toast. I never meant to hurt you, Olivia. The champagne, the emotion of the day. I thought acknowledging the medical reason for wanting another child was somehow being honest, without revealing everything at once. It came out all wrong. The pain in her voice was genuine, but it didn't erase the years of deception. I need to know something, I said, fixing my gaze on our mother. Did you ever truly think of me as your daughter? Not just Blake's potential donor or Richard's biological child with another woman? For the first time in my memory, Eleanor Mercer's eyes filled with tears. Oh, Olivia, from the moment they placed you in my arms at the hospital, you were my daughter. I may not have carried you, but I loved you instantly and completely. Then why? I asked, my own voice wavering. Did it always feel like I came second? Why was Blake always the golden child while I was just there? Our mother looked genuinely shocked. Is that how you felt? Our father moved to sit beside her on the couch, his expression troubled. Olivia, we never intended to make you feel less important or less loved. Intention doesn't change impact, Blake pointed out quietly. No, it doesn't, our father acknowledged. And if that was your experience, Olivia, then we failed you, regardless of what we intended. The direct admission, without qualification or defensiveness, caught me off guard. I had prepared for denials, for explanations, for rationalizations. I hadn't prepared for acceptance and remorse. Our mother reached for a tissue from the box on the coffee table. I wonder if perhaps I was overcompensating, she said slowly, as if the realization was just dawning. Blake was biologically ours, carried in my body. I never doubted my connection to him, my right to be his mother. With you, Olivia, there was always this shadow, this awareness that another woman had carried you, that you shared DNA with someone else. Maybe I was stricter with you, less demonstrative, because I was afraid of not being seen as your real mother. The insight struck me with unexpected force. In all my analysis of our family dynamics, I had never considered that my mother's distance might have stemmed from insecurity rather than preference. "You've never been particularly demonstrative with either of us," Blake pointed out pragmatically. A startled laugh escaped me, breaking the tension momentarily. "No, I suppose not," our mother admitted with a weak smile. "My own mother wasn't exactly the warm, fuzzy type either. But that's no excuse." "What do we do now?" our father asked, the question directed at Blake and me rather than his wife, a subtle but significant shift in family dynamics. "I'm not sure," I answered honestly. "I'm still processing everything." "There's something else we need to discuss," Blake said, his expression turning serious again. "Olivia has a right to know about Sophia, not just the clinical facts of the arrangement, but who she was, where she is now, if possible." Our mother tensed visibly, but our father nodded. "That's fair. We have some information, though it's not current. Last we heard, about 10 years ago, she was living in Portland, Oregon. She's an environmental attorney now, ironically enough, the by. Coincidence of our shared field struck me. Nature or nurture? A question I'd never had to consider before in relation to my own life. "Would you?" Our mother hesitated, vulnerability evident in her voice. "Would you want to contact her?" The directness of the question surprised me. "I don't know yet. Maybe, eventually. I'm still trying to make sense of everything." She nodded, visibly steeling herself. "If you do decide to reach out to her, we would understand. And we would try to support that decision." The effort that admission cost her was evident, and despite everything, I felt a flicker of appreciation for her attempt. Our conversation continued, moving through layers of family history, clarifying details of the arrangement, addressing the complicated legal and emotional aspects of my adoption. There were difficult moments, painful admissions, but also glimpses of potential healing. We had just begun discussing practical next steps when the doorbell rang, an unexpected interruption to our intensive family session. "Are you expecting someone?" Blake asked our parents. They shook their heads, looking as confused as we were. "I'll get it," our father said, rising from the couch. We heard the front door open, followed by a moment of silence that stretched too long to be normal. Then our father's voice, sounding unnaturally formal. "Can I help you?" A woman's voice responded, too low for us to make out the words. Another stretch of silence. Then our father's voice again, strained with tension. "I think you should come in." Footsteps in the hallway, and then our father appeared in the living room doorway, his face pale. Behind him stood a woman in her early 50s, slender, with chestnut hair streaked with silver and hazel eyes that immediately found mine across the room. "I'm sorry to intrude," she said, her voice soft but steady. "My name is Sophia Delaney. I believe we have some catching up to do." The revelation at Blake's wedding had been shocking. The discoveries at Grandma Sullivan's had been illuminating, but nothing had prepared me for the visceral impact of standing face to face with the woman who had given birth to me. A woman whose eyes were startlingly similar to the ones I saw in the mirror every morning. As our mothers regarded each other, across the Mercer family living room, one who had raised me, one who had carried me, I realized we had moved beyond the territory of past secrets into something new and uncharted. Whatever happened next would reshape our family in ways none of us could predict. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them, now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.